Hey everyone, it's Chris from Cables to Clouds here. I hope everyone is enjoying a nice holiday break, spending time with loved ones, family, friends, all of the above. I think this episode is actually coming out on Christmas, so if you celebrate, Merry Christmas and upcoming Happy New Year to everyone as well. Before we get to the episode, I just want to take a second to let everyone know that Tim and I, along with one of our critically acclaimed guests, one of our most downloaded episodes, I think, in the past with Steve McNutt, we've all come together to release the first edition of a certification guide for the AWS Certified Advanced Networking Specialty Exam that is being put out by Pact. So the book is actually up for pre-order now. So if you're interested, if you're doing anything with networking and AWS, I would heavily encourage you guys to check it out. Even if you're not preparing for the exam, I feel like it's just a good overall composition of all the networking services within AWS today. So the book is officially up for pre-order now, and I believe you get early access through Pact if you do the pre-order. So I will put the link in the show notes, and if you're interested, I encourage you to please check it out. And with that out of the way, we'll get to the episode. Thanks.
Welcome to the Cables to Clouds podcast, your one-stop shop for all things hybrid and multi-cloud networking. Now, here are your hosts, Tim, Chris, and Alex.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cables to Clouds podcast. I'm your host this week, Tim, at Carpe-DMVPN on Blue Sky. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Chris, at the Cloud Main on Blue Sky. And as you may have guessed, we have a guest with us this week. We brought Erica Dietrick here to talk about cloud development. I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a second. But, one thing I've always been pushing for is that I want to move across the stack. I want cloud infrastructure and cloud network people to get more understanding around what's riding on the network, because I think we need to have opinions and be opinionated about that. So yeah, I just wanted to bring Erica on here and talk about cloud development. So Erica, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Erica Dietrick. I'm a developer advocate at Cisco. I'm part of our developer program there, and I'm basically enabling people to learn network automation, to use AI tools in their automation workflow. And like you mentioned, Tim, a lot of our community is also infrastructure and network engineers or cloud engineers. So I get to talk to a lot of that community, and I spend about half of my time, building things, breaking shit, learning, and half of my time communicating. So giving presentations, being on podcasts like this, annoying people on social media, all that jazz.
That's awesome. Let's see. So let's just let's just jump right into it. So talk to me a little bit about first of all, just about what your day-to-day looks like, but also about your kind of what you've been doing with cloud development.
Sure. So day-to-day ranges wildly. I would say that we work in seasons. I think that's a developer advocate thing, not just a me thing. But I mean, it is. We work really hard towards big outputs. So whether that's, a awesome YouTube tutorial video at the end of the month, or whether it's a Cisco Live coming up that we're preparing the DevNet Zone and a bunch of talks, it's very periods of head down, delivering, and then kind of a recovery period. So I would say on a typical day for me, I'm usually doing my community interaction first thing in the morning, posting to social media, whatever it was I learned and cobbled together the day before, try to be somewhat useful and educational, and interact with the community there. And then it varies widely. Again, we've got Cisco Live coming up in February, which seems like it's really far away, but it's really not. So usually spend a good chunk of my day trying to ignore everyone after that and become an expert at whatever it is I'm talking about, because that is a big misconception, is that we're just complete experts at everything we talk about. We're like everyone else in tech. We have to learn and then we teach. Mm-hmm. And then the afternoon, I like leaving an ample amount of time for shit catching on fire. So I honestly, my app is pretty flexible.
As it does.
As you do. Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. It's funny because I have many developer advocate friends, and it's pretty simple across all of the different silos of developer advocacy. That's the main goal, if you will.
Very different philosophies around it for sure. It's just very different from company to company, org to org, and Cisco in particular. It's a little more challenging because we're not a traditional developer program.
That's true. Right. We're talking about DevNet, of course. Yeah. So that's a very good point, actually. Most of the developer advocate types are with a developer focused company. Like one of the CSPs, for example. It's a lot of the DAs I know are with like HashiCorp or just one of those developer focused type of organizations. Okay, so all right, so how did you get started with the cloud stuff? I mean, obviously you probably didn't, like all of us, you didn't start with cloud. So like how did you get started into the cloud, like from where you were?
Right. So this is one of the things that I thought could be insightful or interesting, or maybe it's just going to validate what you guys already know about how developers approach the cloud. But so I was working a lot of different gigs after my undergraduate degree, right? I was most recently, before being in tech, working at Starbucks, and managed to get back into a master's program of software engineering. So granted, I was looking to have a challenging and rewarding career, and my dad was a software engineer, and for some reason there was some sort of disconnect where I never learned what he did or why. I just knew he liked his job, and I'm like, what the hell? I'm smart enough, probably. And so I went into this software engineering master's degree at East Carolina, and I would say that even though I had a lot of catching up to do, my experience when it comes to the cloud was probably pretty typical with every developer's learning experience, especially if they're going the academic route. And that is that, development, we're very much focused in the IDE or in the developer environment, where it's just you learn to master a language and you don't really give a, I don't know, should I be cussing less?
No, that's fine. You're good. You're good. This is that kind of podcast.
You don't really give a fuck about anything else, right? So I think that it's a lot more naive and siloed than coming from an IT network engineering background, where you kind of have a general, well-rounded sense of how technology works and how things communicate in the real world. So, you're just sitting there in university, learning variables and methods and whatever other programming concepts, and being happy that you are printing a little line statement to the console. Eventually you get more advanced, right? Depending on your interest, mobile app development, game development, whatever. But what's not taught in university is really anything beyond just building the code.
The language itself, yeah.
So in terms of how are real world apps deployed, where are they deployed, what do you have to consider when deploying them? Everything, I talk about this a lot with DevNet too, but everything from code security to how you document, how you work with other people and not just on your homework. So it's a pretty big problem in my opinion. And it really, I was, I guess, a little bit lucky because in university I ended up taking a Google Cloud Platform course. And it was because they had some kind of student program that they had partnered with ECU, and they were giving, a certain number of free credits.
Oh, nice.
A professor that I absolutely adored had been, I don't know, I think he applied for this program and was chosen, and they gave him some, PowerPoints and materials. And he did a great job with the course. But so I'm lucky in the sense that I was at least exposed to it before, the real world hit me in the face. But, this program, it essentially just kind of throws you into a series of labs. And the labs are hands-on, they're well done, they're meant to get you familiar with different GCP services and using the CLI and all that. But again, as a developer, you just have no idea, like, why am I learning this? There's a huge disconnect, right? You don't have any understanding of networking or how applications run. So, I took that course and it was exposure, but nothing really stuck. what's interesting is that my experience, and stop me whenever you want, my experience both as a student and later on in startup world was all with Google Cloud Platform, because they really push heavy on those, programs, empowering you to use the platform, free credits, all that. But afterwards, I've never touched GCP. It seems to be they're really trying to claim the market there on the little guys and girls.
Well, we've been talking about it on this pod for a while. It's like, it seems like GCP is, or as we should say, Google Cloud.
Google Cloud,
It's not GCP anymore. But Google Cloud. It feels like they win the developer battle like almost every time. Like they are very attractive to developers day in, day out. I don't know do you have a take on why that is? Like, is there something in that realm that was more friendly to you, that was inviting? I mean, obviously there's credits and there's incentives to use the platform so that it's, cost effective. But like the platform itself, what sets it apart in your mind?
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I don't. Okay, so I think it's easier to use than AWS. I don't think there's anything particularly special about how Google Cloud is set up. I just think there's less services to choose from, and it's not as confusing as AWS. And
interesting. Okay.
And in the developer world too, I don't know, maybe this is the same for network engineering, but there's basically Microsoft shops and non-Microsoft shops.
Oh yeah,
right,
sure.
Right, yeah.
So, if you're a Microsoft shop, you're using Azure no matter what.
Right.
And if you're not, and you've never been exposed to a cloud platform, you're probably like, oh, AWS is complicated, jump over to Google.
Yeah. What's interesting is something we observed, and I still think it's true, is that I feel like Google Cloud's networking was built with developers in mind. Like the way they do their networking was built like you don't have to care about it. We'll just kind of do it all for you. Like built towards developers that won't know or care how the network works. We'll just kind of figure it out for you, which confuses a lot of us network people because it doesn't work like you would expect networking to work.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I think it's part of that disconnect too. The farther we abstract what's happening in our cloud services versus what's actually happening in the data center. You know what I mean? As a developer, okay, that's great that you're catering to us and giving us these baby-fied developer-centric cloud services, but again, I don't know. It's kind of the same as when like network engineers, like I work with them, enabling them on the code side, and they want to take shortcuts or just use low code, no code or whatever. It's like, I know this was built for people who don't want to learn, and it's easier to master, but it's not really great.
Yeah, I totally get that.
I'm assuming this has to relate to the fact that there's just been like a boom in the industry and there's more people gravitating towards this career field, right? Like I think, like you mentioned before that early on, that you didn't have to learn some of these things, like, you just like focus on the code, but then maybe you start peeling back the onion and learn how networking works. I feel like that comes with the genuine curiosity that was kind of unique about it, either working in infrastructure or working in software development. You probably had that genuine curiosity regardless, and it kind of led you down those other avenues to explore, because you just like couldn't fathom not understanding how the entire system works, right? But I feel like now that the bar of entry for this stuff is much lower and it's becoming a much more standard career field, like I think people just lack that curiosity. And like I've been a big proponent about this for a long time, is like people need jobs and you have to let people be mediocre at their jobs sometimes, because to some people, this is just a fucking job, right? This is just where you put in your 40 hours and you go home and like you take care of your family, and that's what's important to you, right? You don't give a shit about what you're doing for work really. So like, I don't know. Do you think there's a correlation there, as like just coming from the other side of the stack?
A correlation between, sorry, can you summarize the question?
Yeah, sorry, I said a lot there. Just kind of the boost in the career field, right? And there's probably more people just looking at it from the lens of like, hey, this is a job more than this is like something I'm truly deeply interested in and want to find out more.
I definitely think there's two camps of, I'll just generalize as tech folks, but there's people who just have a love of learning, and maybe they start out in one discipline, but they're at least willing to explore in other areas or where it makes sense, and they want to understand how things work. And then I feel like the other is just looking for that high salary tech career, right?
Right.
And so they gravitate towards the title, and I'm going to get the credential for that title. I'm going to build for that title, and then I don't care about anything else. So I definitely think cloud engineering is one of those. I'm not really sure why, but it's one of those titles people have been really gravitating toward lately. I mean, maybe it feels a little more accessible than things like cybersecurity. You feel like you need, I don't know, more background to get into stuff like that.
Well, I think if you're starting from nothing, like say you're coming through college right now, for example, the CSPs have laid a large advertising campaign around the idea that like, hey, we make everything extremely easy for you. We have we can give you, we're involved in everybody's moving to the cloud. So you're going to find a job as soon as you get these skills. But more importantly, you don't have to know all that on-prem stuff. You don't have to know all that other garbage. We're serverless. Like you don't have to care about 90% of this. We'll take care of all of that and just let you focus on the piece you want to focus on. So maybe it makes it sound more accessible.
Yeah, I honestly think it's a disconnect between what you have to know to get a job and what you should know or have to know to actually be successful at your job. Because I don't know, if you're going for a cloud engineer role, I mean, you're just ticking boxes, so, but really, I can't think of any engineering discipline where you really shouldn't know anything at all about the other disciplines. And, I'm a little bit, I will say I am a anomaly, I think, on the software engineering side, because while I was getting my master's, I did a internship at Cisco Tech, and I actually learned network engineering, I mean, at least at a CCNA level, at the same time as software engineering. So I had more of an appreciation for, this is how it all comes together. But most software engineers, I would say probably zero exposure to network engineering, and then just cloud as needed, or, if you're wearing a lot of hats at a startup or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to come across like I'm poo-pooing and, like the old man shaking his fist. Like, back in my days, you had to learn every bit of the stack or anything like that. I think it's just more now. There's also like a wealth of things that you need to learn, right? If you tell someone to learn everything, then they're never going to start, right? Like AI, like I'm sure AI is learning for that right now is probably so oversaturated, and like people don't know what to do. I don't know
where do you even start with that one?
Yeah,
definitely.
But so it's kind of like freedom of choice is kind of the natural enemy, I think, in this situation, I think.
Yeah, well, and also one thing that the cloud has done that makes developers probably need to learn more about the whole stack is this concept of loose coupling, where we're pulling apart applications into other pieces, right? So now it's not just front end and back end. You've got like databases, you've got web tier, you've got app tier, and like all these different tiers, and they're all in other places. So
what's latency, dude? Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult too, because again, I don't know if this translates to network engineering as well, but as a developer, I mean, even within development, you can have such vastly different experience and knowledge, and even what you're talking about with the decoupling. I mean, I know people who spend their entire careers building, 3-tier applications that they're deploying all in the same place, and they do that same thing over and over and over. They have a hammer and they see everything as a nail. And obviously it varies, right? And other people are working with microservices and stuff, but like with my cloud experience, my first time actually having to use it was when I was hired for my first software engineering job at a startup. And to be honest, it was, I'm thankful for this job. In case this person hears, I am very thankful I had this job. But, it was a little bit traumatic to have to learn, cloud engineering while really practicing software engineering professionally for the first time. And then also there's that, creating a CI/CD pipeline, who does that fall on? Well, when there's 4 people in the startup, somebody's got to volunteer, right? And that, I think that very much, even in that scenario, right, you'll find a lot of times, so there was one other engineer, at least initially in this startup. It was just me doing the back end, which is just the things you can't see, and then the front end guy who's doing, the website. And, it's not a matter of, well, we're going to have a, SQL Server database, and so we should really deploy that in Azure because it's more cost effective, or this, or that. It's just a matter of, well, I like this one, this one seemed nice, like,
I heard it.
And just arguing, back and forth. That's how most developer conversations go that I've had, and cloud was no different. It did not feel like we chose anything based off of any real expertise or reason besides, I feel like doing this. So anyway, that's how I ended up getting into AWS was, I was doing a Microsoft shop backend, but I was told, no, this needs to be an AWS.
Was it told to be AWS because the front end was being developed on AWS, or because the business had decided like AWS we're going to keep it all together, or?
So it was a React native front end. But again, I really think it just comes down to that Microsoft, anti-Microsoft sentiment. I will say I'm pretty opinionated on how many problems this causes, that this is like our only decision-making process and so many technical conversations. But I think it was literally just
anti-Microsoft.
Most people seem to use AWS. Let's use AWS.
Oh, that's
and screw Microsoft.
Interesting. No, that's interesting for a to make such a big commitment, because if you think about it, the business is making a huge bet. When you're doing back end development, front end development, you're doing the whole thing. You're developing the revenue generating app on this cloud, and it sounds like just because didn't want to do Microsoft. Sometimes there's a lot of times, of course, we have those discussions, and it comes down to, hey, what do you know? What have you used before? Yeah. What's your preference? But to think of an entire business betting, of course, it was a startup, so everything's already on fire and it's the Wild West anyway. But to bet the whole farm on AWS just because anti-Microsoft, that's interesting.
Well, and when nobody has any true understanding of these cloud platforms too, I mean, it makes it almost impossible to make any logical decisions. It's a lot of waste of time. I mean, the easiest simple example I can think of is, we had a database deployed in AWS RDS. I don't even remember what that stands for anymore. And then we had an EC2 instance for basically just another portion of the app. It's not that important.
Yeah.
And so anyway, whenever we were working with and testing this app, right, we had to have the instances on, right? It takes time for you to turn the instances on and then for them to tear back down. And so, that cost money. And, people ask, leaders were asking, well, why are they taking so long? Blah, blah, blah. Why are we being charged this? And I'm like, look, whenever I test it, I have to turn it on. It takes time to turn on. It takes time to turn off. And they're like, well, we only want it to turn on, the instant an API call is being made, and then it should turn off after that.
Not a thing.
We wasted at least an entire sprint or so, like a amount of time in developer land.
Right.
Trying to implement middleware that would, on a timer or trigger, turn on and off these instances, and it didn't work.
Okay. So
and again, I was like, this is a really bad idea, and this is not how they're designed. This is how they're designed. This is just how it works. And
did they not understand what serverless was at that point? Like serverless?
So
like Lambda or API Gateway or any of those services are always that are completely elastic.
I'm thinking you front end with API Gateway just to do a Lambda function to start the instances, and then you basically say like the response to the API call is like try again in 15 minutes.
So I will say, as a semi early in career person, I don't get a lot of influence even today or anything that's done, but again, I think it goes back to, with developers at least, it's either, hey, this is what I know and we're going to do this, period, make it work, or I don't know, they've learned some cool new technology, or like they've got into Lambda or whatever, and they're like, everything's, going to be Lambda now,
Right. Hammer and nail. Yeah. No,
Right.
that's the parallels are uncanny, because it's like that with, it's like that with network engineering too. Like nobody ever got fired for buying Cisco. I know the Cisco CLI. I'm CCNA certified. We're buying Cisco, right? Or Juniper, or whatever that is, right? Or hey, I know EIGRP, so that's the routing protocol we're going to use. Whether or not it makes any sense to do so, depending on what you're...
It's infuriating to me. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I just like making my life hard and having to learn new things all the time. But I gotta try, I feel like,
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit more about the startup gig, because that sounds pretty interesting. Specifically, like a little bit. You kind of went into what the business was looking for, which of course was completely untenable. What they were trying to get you to build, but like, what did you end up doing? I'm curious, like from a development perspective, like how I'm interested in the architecture piece that developers have to come up with here.
So I was hired in, I feel like I gotta be careful being too honest, but I was hired in basically because they had initially outsourced the work to an agency in India. And so they had one on-staff engineer who was doing the front end, which was the website and the mobile app portions that you could see. And then this Indian agency was doing the back end. So they were doing a C# REST server, which just means that's where the API calls were being created. And then the SQL Server database, which is where all the data was stored. So, the story I was told was that the communication didn't go well. They didn't get exactly what they were promised. And, for different reasons, you hear that story fairly frequently. But as a startup, it's pretty hard to pay market rate to developers in the US. And so, I was cheap and bright-eyed and looking for that first opportunity. And so I was hired. And I was supposed to just be, and I have a background, right, in C# and SQL Server, at least from university. And so I had come in and I was supposed to basically fix a bunch of bugs, is all I was told, was fix a bunch of bugs, implement a few new features. Again, the architecture of this originally was that it was a React Native front end, C# REST server, SQL Server database, and we're making API calls between each of those three tiers.
Okay.
That's how we communicate between the tiers. So anywho, we get started, and this is very typical of all startups. Every startup I've ever worked at or interacted with, I get started, and it's a completely different situation when I start. We're going to start from scratch. We're going to do this way better. It's going to be highly performant, all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. So we call that greenfield application. Doing a greenfield application when you're doing it from scratch. So I got to actually help, give a voice on architectural decisions, which I think is kind of unique for a junior software engineer. And, that basically started with the database design, because, with a relational database, it's a lot less forgiving.
Oh, yeah.
Than like MongoDB or other types of databases, unstructured.
Like NoSQL or something, yeah.
Exactly. So you really want to think of it from a database perspective and then kind of build the API calls out from there, and then connect the front end via those API calls. And so we started with database design. I don't know how much you want to go into that, but I was literally sitting at a table with a piece of paper, and we're going back and forth and scratching stuff out, and it makes more sense to couple it this way.
I can actually commiserate with you on this, because when I did my WGU cloud computing degree, one of the courses, not just a theory course, but an actual like do something course where you have to create a project, was database design. And I actually had to build a database schema. And like, oh my God, it was like, I still have nightmares. I hated it.
Well, again, what's funny is that, in university, I loved SQL Server. Something about relational databases just made my day. And then I realized it was because in school, I was doing stupid little, user ID application with 3
Green
tables,
fields
and 2 foreign keys, but yeah, so an enterprise, this was an enterprise, I don't know, mixing up my terminology. A real world production database, it was much, much more complicated. And in a startup, you don't really have anyone to ask questions to, right? So
it's very true. You're the like it or not, you're the person.
Exactly. Yes. So did the database design. As the only backend engineer and the only person who understood C#, I was I would say over 50% trusted to just build it how I thought it needed to be built. So I used what's called a model view controller architecture. It's just a way to separate. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm familiar.
And, beyond that, again, in startups, it's usually kind of a cluster. So, it was a matter of do it however you want, and then I'd do it. No, not like that. Or no, it needs to have this too, I
wouldn't know anything about that.
I like to be funny and talk crap, but I honestly learned a lot of this experience. So just
you have to laugh about it, or else.
Yeah.
I mean, well,
I'm just keeping my bridge unburned.
Well, honestly, where else could you have gone and get this kind of experience, even if it is stressful at the time? Like, there's very few places that you could, most places would crib you to the point where you barely learn anything for a year.
I will say that too, it was a cluster, but, had I been at a big, I don't know, Fortune 100, I would have been, I do, work this one little gear and this gear only. So I did get to touch a lot.
It's good after the fact. It's good for building the portfolio. It's good for building the portfolio.
Exactly.
Glad you did it, but you wouldn't sign up for it again.
Well, and things happen too, right? I mean, in startup world, like you have venture capital, like at Cisco, right. I mean, obviously it matters what we do. Deadlines matter. But at the end of the day, we make a lot of money. We're going to survive whether we make mistakes. I've talked about this before we started the recording that, sometimes we, start a product or acquire a product just to cut it. And, in startup world, you really can't afford to do that. That's the death of your company.
Yeah.
And so on top of that, you're usually riding on venture capital. You usually aren't actually profitable for, I don't know, years. Many startups out there are not actually profitable.
No, that's well, yeah, agreed.
So, you got this one little eager, junior engineer who, the entire architecture, the CI/CD pipeline, the way it's deployed is riding on this.
Millions of dollars.
6 months of runway. And then, why is the service down? Emergency, And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to pretend I can figure it out.
Yeah, no, that lessons learned. Everybody, honestly, the best lessons are learned in the fire, but as long as it doesn't actually make you want to leave tech forever, you usually come out the other side with the kind of experience that you would take you years otherwise to get. So there's good and bad to it. It is a very high stress environment. Somebody was asking in Discord yesterday, hey, I want to get into tech, but what's the work-life balance and the stress level like? And I'm like, do you want to know the answer? do you want to get into tech? Because I'll tell you. So anyway, but that's.
But it does get better though, because
it does.
So yeah. I will be starting year 6 in tech this year, and the first 3.5 to 4 years, I mean, you don't feel like you get any wins. Like you feel like nothing. It's not just I'm good at some things and I get that self-esteem boost and I'm also learning and getting knocked back down again. It's just getting hit in the face over and over and not knowing. So, I mean, I feel like that part does change. And I think your attitude also changes about it, right? Because again, university, as a developer, we're not even, I mean, at least I wasn't, and many developers I know, you're not even taught how to debug your code, which is highly unrealistic, right?
Because, really? No unit testing or anything? That's not part of the curriculum?
So I learned how to do unit tests and how to use certain mocking frameworks, but, I mean, I think that some professors, that kind of gloss over the debugger. It's complicated. I won't get
like the step debugger where you have to go point
by
point.
There's this joke in programming land about how we debug using print statements. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Okay.
Yep.
I write Python, so yes,
that's the only way I've
Okay.
ever debugged. So yeah.
So, it's fine in a pinch or sometimes, but it's really not that helpful and inefficient for, real world development. And, but shockingly, it's used constantly. People just do not use the debugger. And that's the real world. The real world is that your code just doesn't work. It doesn't magically work. You mess up all the time. That's changing a little bit with AI coding assistants. Some of the really irritating things that you troubleshoot for hours, don't really happen anymore. But
that's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah. So should we open that up a little bit? I know obviously the kind of AI coding assistants or co-pilots, as we put them, not to use the specific branded item, but it's one of the most popular ones, so it's not like we can avoid it. But I mean, how do you feel that is changing the kind of development lifecycle?
For better or worse?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of AI co-pilots out there. Typically, the one people are most familiar with are code generators, like GitHub Copilot. There's a lot of others out there. And they range from, I only generate code and have chat functionality to I'm a full-on developer environment, meant to, save workflows or suggest things to you in that way. So I will say, at least from a GitHub Copilot perspective, which is, or at least was the most widely adopted AI coding assistant code generator at the time. It's what I've done a bunch of presentations on. It's absolutely revolutionized development life cycles in both good and bad ways. And I do think that even though, bread and butter developers were probably the first to flock to these tools, that, really we're talking about something that's going to change things for anyone who codes. And so, I know we've got some network and cloud people, so I'll speak more to that. At Cisco Lives and when I give talks, the main thing I'm asked again is, do I actually have to learn how to code now? Is it just a matter of prompt engineering? And then there's people on the other side of the fence, right? Who, you're like, you shouldn't be able to touch an AI coding assistant until, I don't know, you're a senior developer or whatever.
Oh yeah. The gatekeeping.
Yeah, all right.
And what's interesting, at least what I've found through my own research and opinions, is, I think that it's really going to be not the code generation per se, especially for network engineers, but it's going to be the chat functionality, believe it or not, that is going to be the most revolutionary. So I will say, let me back up for a second. The way developers are taught and hired, and coincidentally, this bleeds a little bit into teaching network engineers how to code and assessing their skill, is essentially, we give you some assignment, we see how you execute said assignment or how you code it, and then are you able to explain it, right? And then we do some form of that in the hiring process when we're evaluating people too, right? It might be on a whiteboard, it might be solving some stupid riddle, but essentially you just give an assignment and ask to code and then whatever. So, that is completely blown on its head now that there are AI coding assistants, right? Because you have an assignment and you can generate the answer to that assignment and you can hit /explain. Literally, it's that easy. Explain to me what was just written. Explain it to me line by line. And, that's your student assignment. That's your take home for your developer interview. So it's really not an effective way to
gauge ability anymore.
Right. And because it's not an effective way to gauge ability, it poses a lot of challenges for teaching. How do you know when somebody actually knows how to code, and how reliant should we be on these tools? So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I'm sorry. But
No, this is good. This is actually really good. I think
But
this
it's
is
funny
important.
because, like, I've read on social media. I've never had to go through one myself, but I've read a lot about these software engineering interviews where people feel like the process and the interviewing criteria is so strict and so over the top that they hate the interview process because it's all like oh, do this live in front of all of us, write this code, do this thing on a whiteboard, blah, blah, blah. And they think that it should be simplified, and they should almost like the hiring manager should be more trustworthy about things in a sense. But now it almost sounds like, from what you're telling me, like it's kind of spinning back in the other direction. Like, how do you validate people know what the fuck they're talking about? And they haven't just done this on, through a chat bot, other than doing that. Like, where do you think it fits into that?
So I won't spill all the tea, but I'm going to be presenting on this in February.
Ooh,
all right.
Yeah, a roadmap, how I think that we should, now be evaluating and teaching and all that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity, people see it as like, ruining engineers and, they're never going to learn, blah, blah, blah. Right. But I think it's a great opportunity to revamp how we teach people to code and how we assess it. I think that kind of like you mentioned, I think that the model was completely broken. I mean, even when I was just learning to code, right? I mean, I overused the word traumatic, but it was traumatic, There were many tears shed. It wasn't fun. I didn't learn the most efficient or effective way.
Yeah, okay.
And so I think that, we can focus more on things like people's past experiences and what they learned from it and how they would apply that to new problems, and talking through people's thought processes and the way they think about problems, right? Because that's what engineers do. It's not about, do you know C# or Python? I mean, a little bit. It depends on the level of the role. But it's about, can you actually think? Like, do you know how to solve a problem? Have you encountered enough problems that you can deduce how to solve a similar problem at our company? So, that is generally the direction that I hope interview assessments are taken. And again, I think that from a chat perspective, really it's just Google on steroids. So developers learn through Google, right? We do a lot of teaching ourselves. But Copilot chat has been absolutely revolutionary. I taught myself TypeScript in a couple of weeks using Copilot chat, which is absolutely phenomenal in my opinion, at least based on my work speed. So yeah, very long story short, I could talk about that forever, is that it's really making us rethink how we teach people to code and how we assess it, for network engineers as well.
What do you think about not just AI as a code assistant, which is kind of what we're really talking about, hey, generate this code for me. You mentioned like, it changes the way we teach people. Do you think, or what do you think does AI have a place in the teaching process as well, or is it really better kept to the assistant level? And if it does have a place, like, where do you see that fitting in?
Well, I can answer yes to both your questions, because it should always be kept at the assistant level, in my opinion. It is not the brain. And that is where most people's disappointment comes from. Again, especially if you don't know how to code, is you're just like, do this for me,
right.
So it is most effective as an assistant, and that makes sense, right? Because if it's the brain, then why are we even here? And then, 100%, I think that, it's essentially, it's going to be akin to using a calculator for math, right?
Yeah.
So, again, it doesn't matter what your background is, you're going to want to learn certain foundations. You're going to want to learn how to think programmatically, because that is a skill, right? Thinking from like a discrete mathematic, logical perspective. And then again, I won't spill all the tea, but there's certain concepts I think you should learn, some building blocks. And then I think from there, I think you use your calculator to continue learning and to, not generate all your code, but at least to continue learning.
Yeah, I think that's valuable. I think it's, I hope you call your talk software engineering reimagined or something like that. But just kidding.
It's already submitted. I should have talked to you.
No, but I think that is a great approach, because I feel like that kind of takes a page out of the network engineering interviews that I've done over the past, like whether or not I'm the interviewee or the interviewer. Mm-hmm. I interview a lot of people, and a lot of times when I'm asking questions, I'm not asking the question to know whether or not you know the answer. I don't care if you know the answer. I want to know how you react when you don't know it. Like how you explain how, like, and what you said, you want to know if people have seen enough problems to learn like
Thought
theory
process.
around what their thought process is, how they troubleshoot, if they can draw correlations. I want to see how they build that mind map live, right? And then it depends on what questions they ask me in response, right? That's
how you really tell. What questions do they ask you back to try to get more information, or because you can teach anybody network engineering, you can teach anybody TypeScript or code or whatever. I can teach structured data JSON to somebody. Like all that stuff, it's just stuff in a book that you can teach someone. You can't teach someone how to think. You can't teach someone how to solve problems. Like, not really. I mean, you can, but like the actual thought process of solving problems is something that people have to kind of come up with, figure out how it works for them, and they have to do it themselves.
Yep, 100%. And I mean, these co-pilots, right? I mean, we can try to slow them down and say, rah, no, keep them out of coding. But I mean, really, they're going to infiltrate every area of life. Like I went to my first Black Hat this year, which is a cybersecurity conference. And they were talking about how Microsoft has a Copilot studio now where anybody of any non-technical background can create their own AI Copilot and connect it to, like, for instance, their HR database and have it assist them with things or whatever it is their profession is, right?
That sounds like a great idea.
So there's these self-serve, no-code, low-code options, but there's also just all these products coming out, right? I mean, Copilot for Azure was recently announced. So there's no aspect of tech that is not going to be touched by some form of AI assistant that can't just parrot out facts to you, right? Or lines of code. So again, I think we could see it as a bad thing, but at the end of the day, companies want productivity. So it's in your best interest to learn it. And it's an opportunity to hire people who can solve problems.
Yeah. I mean, and it can keep people from having to know everything. Like, for example, I'm working on a project with Andrew Brown for his Gen AI bootcamp. And, we were working on something yesterday where I needed to get PyDict data out, which I didn't even know PyDict was a thing. Like it's Python interpretation of structured data. So I went and I explained my problem. I think I was using Claude. I explained my problem and what I was looking to get back from structured data, and it did it. Now I can't say it's 100% correct because I don't know it well enough, but I will say that it's got me a lot further along than I would have been had I tried to go read documentation and tried to learn it all myself. Yeah, I mean, it's the personal assistant thing is definitely keeping you from having to learn everything.
Well, even just navigating bad documentation. So I'll just talk about it because I kind of axed the project, but I was interested in doing a VS Code extension at one point this year. And, I was not familiar with that development, right? They have their own API that you have to learn. So I'm going through the API documentation and I'm reading through it. And at first it doesn't make sense because I'm brand new to it. And then after hours, I'm like, this still makes no fucking sense to me. I have zero clue what they're talking about. And, I was like, I'm just going to ask my GitHub Copilot, and GitHub Copilot just broke it down. Boom. Simple. Summarized how the API is structured, what API call I need to make to do certain actions. It was that easy. So I didn't even need to really learn the API. I didn't need to struggle over the documentation or guess or make the API call and realize that it actually needs this additional field that's required or whatever.
I think people are afraid though that people are leaping straight to oh, well then, I don't need, then if I know that, then you're going to replace me with a robot type of thing. And I think that's I think the more I learn about what they are and are not capable of, it's a very large leap. If the only value you bring to your organization is knowing how a certain API call works, then you're probably not going to be around very long anyway.
Right. Well, I think I lost my train of thought. Let me see if I get it back. I think that it's the same conversation with automation, right? I mean, everybody, they set their sight on some point in time in technology and they're like, I'm going to get good at this. And as soon as they get good at that, the point has moved somewhere else and they have to know something else, right? And so they think that knowledge is useless. But I mean, it's really not. right? I mean, even just from the perspective of problem solving and learning, or how the brain works, right? I don't remember all the terminology, but when you learn something, the brain can more easily learn related topics because it has something to connect it to. So
that's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, there's many reasons you can go on and on about that, but I think people just get too laser focused on, got to know this.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the moving goalpost thing, the tech treadmill is well published and well understood, right? We're always on a treadmill in tech, and it's like the the old cartoons with the fishing pole, and it's got the banana or a piece of cake or whatever it is that's hanging. we're all just like running towards it forever. But that's a whole other episode. Okay, so no, this has been great. We need to go ahead and wrap up, but it's been really great having you on, talking to you about this stuff. I think we covered a lot of good stuff tonight.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on and for dealing with my Casper lighting, and a great conversation. You guys are doing a great job on the podcast. So
thank you.
I'll do what I can in post, but I promise all the listeners, or the watchers, I should say, that Erica does not look as pale faced.
She's not
as her
quite. Yeah, she's not quite.
A notch up though. It's fairly close.
I mean, we live in North Carolina. There's no way she's walking around with skin that pale and still being alive.
I got a lot of Irish descent, so.
Oh, me too. Yes. Yeah. So how do people find you on socials? How do people connect with you?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn as my name, Erica Dietrick, and I'm on X, Instagram, and TikTok for as long as that lives. Erica_the dev.
Two of those things might be getting
platforms
killed off.
to come out, but that's where you can find me for now.
We might lose two of those things before too long. We'll see.
Yeah. X? Oh man, okay. Well,
it's crashing and burning with the tech tech community right now. But anyway, okay, great. So everybody go.
Do you want to plug the talk you have coming up? What was that?
Or anything else you want to plug?
Sure. So I have 4 talks coming up at Cisco Live in February, but the one most relevant to our discussion is called Teaching Coding Skills in the Age of AI. And I'm actually co-presenting. It's my first co-presentation. I'm doing it with my dad. He's a university professor.
Awesome.
He's been a software engineer for 25 years. So I thought it'd be a nice blend of perspectives, the somewhat newer developer and seasoned.
That's very cool.
Yeah, we're going to take you through, the traditional where we were before and where we're headed now, provide you with a roadmap. And again, at the last Cisco Lives I've went to, every single time I'm approached by managers of network engineers saying, I need a blueprint for teaching my engineers how to code, and we're going to provide that.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to see it. This is in Amsterdam still, right? It's in Amsterdam. Yeah.
And hopefully it'll rotate. If it's popular, it will. Hopefully.
Oh, I love it. That's a great idea. I can't wait to catch it on the replay. All right, everybody. Well, this has been the Cables to Clouds podcast. Make sure you follow us on all of the social medias that we still are on. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. It's Tim, and this has been the Cables to Clouds podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe to us in your favorite podcast catcher, as well as subscribe and turn on notifications for our YouTube channel to be notified of all our new episodes. Follow us on socials at Cables2Clouds. You can also visit our website for all the show notes at cables2clouds.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.